Hello, everyone. Today, we embark on a deeply moving journey, one that transcends borders, time, and the very fabric of human emotion. On the 8th of March 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MS-370 vanished from the radar screens, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and shattered lives. Among those affected was Mr. Narendran, whose wife was aboard flight MS-370. In this episode, we sit down with Mr. Narendran to hear his story, the early days of loss, the relentless media attention, and the resilience that emerged from the depths of grief. This is more than a tale of tragedy, it's a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Mr. Narendran has also written a book, Life After MS-370 Journeying Through a Void. Mr. Narendran, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for reaching out and inviting me to have a conversation with you. It's my pleasure, and I'm honored to be here with you this day.
Thank you, sir. And since both of us are from the same town, I'll just say vanakkam too. And
Vanakkam to you too.
thank you. Now, in your book, I read that sometime in the early hours of the 8th of March, you received a call from the friend of your wife and who shared the news that she saw on TV. And sometime later in the day, actually later in the afternoon, that is when you actually received confirmation, an official confirmation. Can you talk us through those hours, the first few hours?
Sure. It's 10 years is a long time, so I'll just have to journey back a little bit and jog my memory. It's fairly well etched in my recall, so maybe I will be fairly faithful to what happened. I think the way I recall that morning was at about 6:30 in the morning. I had a call from my wife's colleague, and she said that MS-370 is missing. Now, I think that news didn't register really. I was just wondering why over a weekend, early in the morning, this lady should call me and tell me something that I have no clue how it connects with me and why I should even, pay another minute's thought to it. And then, I said, so what? So what about it? And then she said, no, Chandrika is on this flight. So we believe. And I said, are you sure? He said, yes, I have her booking details, and reasonably certain she was on this flight, and the flight is missing. So I said, okay. So then I was just kind of stumbling out of bed at that time. So I put on the television, and there I saw that indeed there was news flashing that there was this aircraft, Malaysian Airlines flight missing, and there was no news really at that time because it had just passed the time when it was supposed to land, perhaps an hour or so after it was supposed to land, and there was no news, and they had no clue. And so I said, okay, let me wait for news. So I kind of stuck with the television for a while. There was nothing really. So then I waited much longer. I wanted to be sure that she was indeed on the flight. So I called this lady again, and she said, no, I have a boarding pass. And then she sent the boarding pass to me. But I said, boarding pass is no proof that she was aboard the flight. In these days, you can print it in your home. That's no proof. So I said, okay, so do we have the passenger manifest? And the passenger manifest was not available. And then then began a very long wait to be certain that indeed the flight was missing. It had not landed, in some other place, and that it was a fact that my wife was on the flight. So we waited. We called different airlines, people in the press, people, friends who knew friends who might in some ways know a little more than what I myself could fathom. And we kind of worked the phones for a good 2, 3 hours. And nothing reliable, nothing confirmatory was forthcoming. And then at about close to noon was when I got through Twitter. Somebody had forwarded the passenger manifest, and then I tallied it with the passport numbers, the passenger names, and all that. And it seemed reasonably certain that Chandrika was on the flight. But yet, I said it wasn't a confirmed release. It wasn't a communication from the airline, so I should wait. So the wait continued, till almost 3, 4 in the evening. And then that's when we started getting news, by way of confirmation that indeed the flight was missing and the passenger manifest was released. And by then, the news is all over the television, including the fact that some Indian passengers were on board. I don't know how, but my wife's photograph and names were flashed, apparently, and I wasn't aware. I was, at that time, not so much glued to the television, but, managing my mother, and people had started flowing into the house, to inquire. And so already the mood had turned quite somber, and, there was a deathly silence in a way as people started trooping in, and they would sit quietly and, as if some calamity had struck. Maybe at that time, I didn't still register in my head that some calamity indeed had struck. So I think my anxiety at that time was to make sure that my mother did not hear it from some third party, that she didn't stumble upon news on television when she was watching it. So I kept her away from television for a while. I mean, these are silly things that we try and do to sort of make sure that people have a soft landing, for bad news. And so eventually I had to tell her, I had to get my sister over and have her around when I told her. So it was a difficult day. It is a day of just groping, trying to get information, be sure, be certain. And of course, there was no thought to what next. But I think that's as far as we could come by the end of the day. The search had resumed, and not resumed, it started at that time, if I recall. But one was also aware that it was nighttime, around those parts where a search was being undertaken. And we knew that, that nothing much was going to be forthcoming. So then there was a night-long wait, vigil, if you can call it that, to know and wait till the morning to see if there is something that might come as a break from the. There was a foreboding, I think, of something that was not a happy ending, something that was unpleasant. And I think it was just the hope that the morning will bring some better tidings. And that's how the day went.
It was remarkable to read from your book that during those initial hours, right, you actually were the source of strength for the others, the folks around you, and you had attributed that to the adrenaline with all the news coming in. That was something, that was just remarkable to read. Now, any accident is a tragedy, but aviation accidents, they always grab the attention of people all over the world. Now, it's the whole world basically watched MH370 disappear, right? How did you navigate the media attention and constant speculation of those, the first few days?
Well, the fact of the matter is we didn't watch it disappear. It just disappeared. That apart. Yeah, I think there was a lot of curiosity about, the family and how they were dealing with the news. I think for the first 3, 4 days, the Chandrika's office effectively kept the press at bay, and they were fielding the questions. They were fielding the heightened press interest in what is going on. And there were calls coming in at home, which I didn't attend to because I think at that time, there was other things at home to manage, other people at home to manage. And yeah, there was a lot of adrenaline for sure because one just didn't know which way this whole episode is going to turn. And you are you're readying for bad news and you're hopeful for the best. And in that phase, I think I didn't have very much to say or engage with the press really at that time. But I think I think on the 5th or the 6th day was when I actually I had my first direct encounter with the press. I did a press conference. I thought it was important to draw attention to the fact that my own government, the airline industry in India, the passenger associations that are located in this country, nobody particularly had any word on the subject, no attempt to reach out. And this kind of incident doesn't happen on a regular basis, for one to know what to do and what to expect. So I was hoping for some kind of perhaps information, assistance, guidance, some hand-holding, and nothing was forthcoming. And I thought it was important to just make this point loud and clear. So that's what I essentially tried doing in my first press conference. But I think as the days rolled, the interest from the press or the media didn't abate. And in fact, it just kind of kept growing and growing. And, with wall-to-wall coverage from some of the networks, there was a constant clamor to sort of get some sound bites, some clips, some word from the families. And I think that continued for quite a while. I had no experience engaging with the press. So in some way that it was demanding, it was exciting, it was trying at times, and it's frustrating at times. All of it, actually, because sometimes what you wish to get across is to be not felt critical or important by the receiver or by the host. And something else that you may have said, seems to acquire a greater significance, unintended by me, So it took me a while to understand how this whole thing works. And so it took, and once I figured, what this whole thing is about, for instance, you just get 2 minutes, of air time. And at the pace that I speak, I might not get too much, out. So I had to learn what it is to be able to even say my piece in those 2 minutes. And there are many lessons like this. And sometimes, the interviewer has a certain agenda, which you may or may not wish to pander to. And you still want to get across the message out. So you figure how to make that happen. So there are various things that happen over the months, actually, that helped me, I think, to understand, not just about how to work with the press or the media, but also how to become more articulate about both what one is feeling, what one is thinking, and what one is attempting to do in a way that is meaningful to anybody who's listening on the other side. Right? So that was the overall experience as I recall.
And it is disheartening, but sadly not surprising that there wasn't much support from the government or authorities in those days. It's sad, it's just sad. Now, when did it all eventually sink in? And at that point, how did you process the grief?
Okay, let me say that I think it took perhaps 3-4 months before I had to come face to face with the reality that there is somebody missing. There is somebody whose presence was, always there. Now, only present in recall, in memory, in her absence. And this was a very difficult phase because the fact of the matter is the house we built, every little piece, every corner of the house um, had her imprint. And it was things that we did jointly. Uh, every hour of the day had something to remind me of her. And so it was not something that I could put aside or, like a car wipe, I just sort of use it to wish it away, wash it away. So it was not easy. And for quite a while, for instance, I just let things be. I think I went through a certain phase of inaction, bordering, I think, on paralysis, perhaps, a lack of interest in anything, a difficulty to actually cognitively, mentally, intellectually engage with anything at any level of detail. And it took me, I think, 3-4 months before I could probably concede that perhaps what I'm experiencing is also some form of trauma. And so while at the surface, there was responsibility. I have a mother who was knocking 80. At that time, of course, she was around 70 plus. I had a daughter who was studying in Delhi. I had some responsibility towards them. I had a house to manage, a household to take care of, and I couldn't just wish it away. And so at some level, the daily chores of existence, I think, just kept carrying on. But on a number of fronts, I just let things slide. And there were also, I think, many, many, many evenings which were rather quiet, lonely, and very tough to navigate. Because I think many decisions were just left pending, for instance, because I think most things we did by consulting, by asking, by informing, and so on. And in the absence of that input, that companionship, I didn't quite want to sort of act or take any call on anything. And so there was a slide. I mean, undoubtedly there was a slide. Till I suppose I reached a point where I said, this is not going to make things any better. This is not going to change things. And not doing anything is not a way forward. It's a slide back, and so on and so forth. There are many such, I think, moments of self-talk, which effectively nudged me out of this state of complete inaction and I had to effectively tell myself that the future beckons, right? And it has to be a future without my wife. She and memory is a difficult thing to engage with because at that time they were still very fresh. They were very real. They would flood at times, and and at very unexpected moments, and something would trigger, and then you would sort of get drowned in it. So it took sorry. So it took a while, I think, to simply know how to stay anchored, stay real, stay in the moment, be present, take charge, and that from from a certain point in time, I had to say, now this innings is mine. This call now, any call is my call. I take charge, and um, help is welcome, input is welcome, but it has to be my call. So I think it took me quite a while, many months, before I could actually come to a point where one could simply say, okay, there's no going back. There is only a way forward. I think that's what it was like those early months, at least for sure.
Not to state the obvious, but we all know what makes MS-370 different from the other, aviation disasters. It's been more than 10 years now, and still, they haven't located the plane, the aircraft. So that, is completely different. We've never seen anything like that before. So, and even, as recent as last month, I've been hearing news about how the Malaysian government is planning to restart the search and pay the company only if they actually find the aircraft. So there's so much uncertainty. So living with that uncertainty, right? That it's hard to imagine what that is like, and how did you manage that, and how do you actually cope with the lack of closure?
Yeah, I understand that. Look, I've always believed that there's a cycle of life, and the day you're born, there's going to be a end date and expiry date. So in that sense, there was always a certain understanding, a certain acceptance that we don't have an infinite tenure on this planet in this life. So to that extent, I think there was a certain willingness to accept the possibility that somebody who's very dear to you may not be around any longer. So that was one part of it. I lost my father quite early in life. So I've encountered some of this fairly early, and I've sort of lived through that, and I was quite confident that the forces of life are not going to forsake me, and that if I've come this far, I can go the distance. So there was some level of confidence that it's in some plane. So while there was a certainty that we all see when somebody dies, and I'm not getting into euphemisms of somebody passing and so on. People die. That's the reality. When somebody dies, there's a finality about it. Okay, and you may take your time to work through it, but there is no prospect of a turn back from somebody who's already gone. And I think with MS-370, the difficulty that I think me and many others have encountered is not just the fact of loss, but actually the reality of not knowing what really happened, who or what caused the disappearance of the plane, where might it be, and what might have been the last moments if indeed it met its end. Now, it posed many difficulties. Do we speak about somebody who's no longer with us in the past tense? Okay. Do we keep it as a provisional. For example, for a long time, I would say, yeah, I lost my wife, which is true. Factually and literally, it's true. We lost her. You know, that was the kind of settlement I made with myself in the language that I used. Which is just factually correct. We lost. So there are various devices that one had to use to sort of come to terms with the fact that there is somebody who is very dear to us who is not around, and also that we don't know. I believe, and it's become clearer to me more recently, that actually closure has two components, according to me. And for instance, many of us, I think we have moved on. I think we're not stricken by grief any longer. All right? There is not the pall of gloom, of melancholy, of grieving and a sense of loss that permeates every moment. No more. That's the fact. But that we still don't quite know rankles. It's like you puzzle over it over and over. And every time there is some news, okay, which promises or heads towards, in some direction, towards knowing what may have happened, you perk up, you start looking up, and you start reading up, and you start getting engaged all over again. And then nothing really happened, nothing moves. And I think this aspect of closure, a comprehensive closure, I think, perhaps can only come if eventually we do know what happened with some certainty, with some credible evidence. All right. And if that happens, I think we can put some things to rest. Otherwise, it's like, letting something, be suspended. And, you're not entirely at peace. I think it's perhaps fundamental to human beings to be curious, I suspect, and to want to know, to puzzle over things. And I have a feeling this is another instance where it's a challenge to many things. A challenge to science. It's a challenge to politics. It's a challenge to national security issues. It's many challenges that are sort of simultaneously at play in trying to figure out what really happened. And there are commercial interests as well. It's a challenge to commercial interests. So many issues that come together in this. So yeah, so in that sense, I think closure, I also believe, for instance, that closure is actually a matter of choice. Right? Some aspects of closure are a matter of choice. Even with the certainty of somebody passing away, I may simply refuse to accept the fact and be steeped in nostalgia, be steeped in memory, in recall, and so on, and not accept the reality that this person is not around anymore. And that's why I'm saying it's also a choice to say, okay, all good things come to an end. And I'm putting a lid on it. I'm closing this chapter. I move on.
You mentioned, curiosity, right? It's a very human thing. And so how did you deal with those two different worlds? Meaning you are in this world where, you've lost your wife, but, the rest of the world, yes, we all grieved for a bit, but then the focus shifted to, what happened, especially with all the rumors and, I feel bad putting it this way. It became a very interesting, curious story for the rest of the world, right? So you are here, and then the rest of the world is, at a different plane, right? So how is it? How do you deal with that?
Okay. I have 2, 3 things to say. One, personally, I'm reconciled to the possibility that I may never know in my lifetime.
Mm.
All right. Because even where to look for the aircraft has been largely probabilistic. There's no certainty. If we knew where to look for it, by now we would have found it. Okay. And so maybe there will be hit and misses a few times. We've already had those episodes. And maybe it might continue for a little longer till somebody says, I don't think, good money needs to chase bad causes. All right. We don't know. So in some ways, I'm reconciled to this fact that I may never know, but eventually I also believe someday we will know. Okay, so that's one part of this. The second, I think, is that I think far too much emphasis has been placed on the families, affected families need to know. Right? And so oftentimes, the families come to the forefront, or they're pushed into the up and center, and then many things are said and done around it. The fact of the matter is, this is a commercial aircraft. International flight, lost on an international route for reasons we yet don't know, even 10 years down the road. And anytime during this 10 years, it's remained a question unanswered, right? It's a fact, it's unanswered. So it's not, and I always wonder, wouldn't the public, wouldn't people at large really want to pursue this to its logical end and find out and to know? There is a question of safety that is lurking. There is a challenge to safety that's lurking. There's a challenge to security that's lurking. Okay, that's unanswered. There is a possibility of a recurrence if we don't know what caused it in the first place. So, for me, more and more over the years, I've seen it less and less as a matter for the families to be satisfied, to be appeased, for their anxieties and their needs to be put to rest, as much as an issue that concerns every person who takes a flight sometime in their life. And what I'm intrigued by is there's actually not as much curiosity as I would expect. Not either anymore, let's put it this way. Even the media comes alive about 6 weeks before the anniversary. Okay. And then the stories start rolling. We see that. Okay. Invariably, the authorities have a free pass, or they are impregnable as far as access is concerned. They simply are not held to account. So they become human stories or investigative pieces which doesn't add a bit to what we already know. So many of them, most of them, end up regurgitating, the whole saga from March 8th, 2014,
Right.
And then add, every year that passes, there'll be some new angle, a new theory, a new conspiracy, a new actor who kind of gets into the fray. Everybody has a little airtime, some, print space, and then it moves on. So, it's, but it's business as usual, frankly. If you look back over the last few years, it's business as usual. The airline industry couldn't care. All right. Collectively, I have not heard anything from any of the airline honchos. Okay. Anybody connected to the airline industry, don't care. Um, Governments don't even, I think, remember, right? Including the governments of the passengers from 14 countries. We had, I think, passengers were from 14 nationalities. Those governments don't seem to even remember, right? So I don't know. I'm beginning to also have doubts about, what are people curious about, you
Mm.
know, and in fact, once in a while, it used to be it used to anger me at some time when people would ask me, what's the latest? Or, has a plane been found? Or some such thing. And the people, well-meaning people, friends, people in the family. And so I would be quite tempted to say, just pick the newspapers, just Google, just search on the net, and you will have information. Okay. There's this belief that in the families have more information and more valid information than is otherwise available from other sources. This is a myth. The families quite often have received short shrift from the authorities. So yeah, those are things that are realities of what you see on a daily basis.
Yeah, that must be difficult. Like, what do you know that we don't know, right? Uh, Now, you mentioned, I mean, you expressed confidence that the aircraft would in fact be located one day, and um, you know, and I believe that too. Especially, you've probably heard this, but a couple of months ago, there was news about how a team thinks that they may have located Amelia Earhart's plane, which went missing in 1937. It's going to be 100 years soon, right? So yeah, so I'm confident too. But to your point, yes, I don't know if it'll be too late by then. Right, and so, but all this happening, right? Are there any moments that stood out for you in terms of unexpected grace? Any anecdotes from friends or even strangers that that just stood out for you in a positive way?
I understand the question, but I've not allowed encounters to linger longer than they need to. So and and the experience has been that there have been countless instances where people have reached out, either with words or just simply a minute that they sat next to you in silence. Um, there are people who've written in response to something that I may have posted on my blog or in social media, and very kind words, thoughtful words, very well-meaning gestures. So there have been actually from across the world, to be honest, not just India, but across the world. Many have reached out to with a hand of friendship, and they continued, even if I've not met them, they've continued to be very, very close, intimate friends. So I'm unable to sort of put my finger and say this was something that stood out for me, or a particular encounter stood out for me. I have simply been awash with a lot of love, a lot of support, and a lot of goodwill from most unexpected quarters, from most unexpected parts of the world, frankly. So the one thing that stands out is the fact that our own government has never thought it's fit to reach out. That's very odd, according to me, and probably not even legally an acceptable position. So that's the way things are.
You're here, and your wife was on the flight, right? So, um, right, we were just talking about closure or the lack of it, right? And but what sort of what memories of your wife bring comfort? Are there any things that you do from time to time, periodically? Anything that you would like to share?
Interesting. I have not set up a gallery of memories, right? And so I don't have a scrapbook. Let's put it that way, right? But what I do have are, moments when I recount something, or something that I see around me, a conversation with somebody, or I'm rummaging through the house and, I find something and, it brings back some recollections of a time that we may have had some part to play in that little piece lying in the house. So that's largely been how it has panned out for me. Um, I I do think there are a few things about her that stand out even today, very loud and clear. For instance, I recall her to be a very intense person, intense, full of life, and you know, uh, uh, many things that had a very strong Gandhian kind of a outlook to things. For example, she was vehemently, not vehemently, but she was very forcefully nonviolent. You know, she always felt that the better argument should win, not your decibel level or just the power that you wield. Uh, she was very strongly environmentally wise about what we were doing to the planet, and in her own ways, the way that we ran the house, it bore the imprint of her environmental consciousness from little small things. And so if I look around issues of gender, for instance, they were very, very close and dear to her. The whole our relationship started on the platform of an equal relationship, and I've had to learn what this means. I perhaps grew up in a fairly sheltered. I was a mama's boy, perhaps at some point in time, and I had to learn what equality in a marital relationship means, and that is not arithmetic at the end of the day. That's something very different. So, so we went through a tally of chores that we would, you know, total up and say who's doing more or less and so on. And then it kind of morphed into something else and moved to a place of respect, regard, and concern for what each of us were doing and bringing to the home. So there are many, many things about her which were uh, very inspiring in a way. It continues to find some resonance in the sort of things that I do and I try and work with. Um, yeah, so lots of things. She had a great sense of humor, and in any gathering, one would hear her peals of laughter very, very distinctly. So yeah, so she had a great zest for life.
And in your book, you had written about the episode where a foreign couple, comes and stays in your home for a couple of nights, I believe, right? And for me, I saw it as a very light-hearted take on, her personality. And I'm going to ask folks to actually go and read it. And
Yeah.
I think your writing will do justice to that instead of me summing it up here. Uh, Thanks for sharing that. And now, you know, I believe 5 Indian families lost their dear ones, right? And then, of course, like you said, people from 14 different countries. And so people all over the world, the majority were, of course, Chinese nationals. And in your book, you've also written about how you were in constant communication with the other folks, and then the challenges with communication itself because of, the language barriers. um, so over the years, how has that relationship evolved? Are you still in touch with folks?
Okay. Okay. there were 3 families with and 5 Indians on the flight. So I was affected. There's another gentleman, roughly about the same age as me. He lost his wife. And a third family where the man lost his parents and a brother. So there were 5 Indians, but from 3 families. But overall, there were, I think, people from about 14 countries who were on the flight. I got wise to this need to collaborate with other families and to engage and to connect and to rally around a little late, almost a couple of months after the plane disappeared. And I'd struggled initially to get the attention of the Malaysian government, because at that time, because of the preponderance of the Chinese families, and the 150 plus families were affected, a lot of the attention was focused around them. And so you thought, I think and given the fact that my own government was missing, from the whole action, I was a little lost and I didn't know what to do. And so it became important to somehow figure how to reach across to other families and to know how are they coping and what are they doing and what is that they are hearing, and so already there was a collective that had come together, some in Beijing, some in Malaysia, and I think slowly the families kind of got in touch and we sort of formed an association, a family association of passengers. It's been a difficult experience actually, because the fact of the matter is that we're dealing with different nationalities, different cultures, different time zones, different orientations. For example, just I might be more comfortable saying my wife passed away. Other cultures may have an issue with being very open about it. Culturally, for them, no chapter is closed till there is evidence, right? So we're dealing not just with people, but actually people from very different cultures as well. And so it's been quite an experience to find a platform, to create a platform where we could connect, we could engage, we could share, we could harmonize our views around, the next steps vis-a-vis the government of Malaysia, and vis-a-vis, our own respective governments. So, on issues of funding, the search, on issues of, pushing the Malaysian government on issues of compensation, on, contracting with a search firm, on a number of issues. And it's also a fact that families were trying to move on as well, because, there had to be some, call it the new normal, but everybody was in search of some normal in their own lives. And at different times, getting back to the issues of search and investigation, it was a kind of a difficult reminder, unfortunate reminder of the fact that somebody was missing in their lives. Right? And so people's interest and involvement would kind of wax and wane. And, it also meant newer faces and newer voices would kind of come to the fore. But I think a lot needs to be done in how we organize and how we represent, how we engage with the press, the media. There are many learnings there, I think. So let's see how it goes from here. But it's not been easy. Sometimes because English often ends up becoming the language of communication for for a large part of the world, people who could communicate in English became, the point of contact quite often, to engage, to speak, and to articulate on behalf of the families and so on. So, so, so one might argue that, some ended up bearing a disproportionate part of the responsibility. So all kinds of things happen. I think when 100+ families sort of decide to put their hearts and minds together.
Yeah, and that's the sad part, right? I mean, like, so many families, but no answers yet. And it's and it's been, like I said, over 10 years. You know, I don't think anyone can imagine what folks go through. It's just, but now, what is it that you wish other people are mindful of? When folks hear about these things. So I'll give you an example. I mean, all the recent news about Boeing, right? It has reached a point where people make fun of, or there are so many memes floating around. Yes, I've occasionally had a laugh at it, but then we lose sight of the the major incidents like this. So what do you tell people about all this? And by the way, how do you feel when you hear things about this, aircraft safety and all?
Okay. I read them with interest. I have, through my interactions with safety experts and others connected with the industry, I'm reasonably aware that findings of most such investigations are a very carefully calibrated, compromise between competing interests. Okay, because there are dollars involved, there's liability involved, there are investments involved. Okay, and there are reputations involved. So I understand that and I see that, and so I know that if something comes out into the open, for example, about Boeing, things must be quite bad. It worries me, it bothers me, and it's how far would we kind of look the other way when commercial interests override issues of safety, issues of design excellence, of solidity in manufacturing, and things that people of science, should draw a line and never compromise. So it bothers me. That's surely something that concerns me, and I do share once in a while. I've given up at least a part of me, which till some years ago, I would try to go into great lengths to try and understand the technical issues involved, either about MH370 or about Boeing or about aviation itself. And I realized that, I'm not a technologist, and I don't need to become one to make sense of what are largely issues of human interactions, goals, human endeavor. Okay, and I think some things should be left to the scientists and the technologist community, and I should never pretend that I can read up and just think I can find my way to ask some intelligent question. That's silly. So I'm not with the details of what's going right or wrong from a technical standpoint, but I do understand management. I do understand behavior. I do understand what makes sense from a societal perspective. And so largely my response comes from there. But I do believe, and I may not be very popular for saying this, I think at some stage we need to be able to laugh at ourselves. Loss or no loss.
Mm.
I think part of healing, part of growing, part of moving on is also to give that space for oneself to have a good laugh, and not stay too touchy,
Mm.
After a point, and what I think it does is that it releases others as well. I've experienced this and I could be wrong. Sometimes I've encountered people who, knowing the circumstances of my life, end up kind of conditioning how they engage with me in a certain way, which is completely unnecessary. But I have moved on. And so to imagine, so they perhaps imagine that, they need to tiptoe around a few things, a few facts, a few events, and, lest they, sort of hurt me or, trigger something in me or so on. And so it sort of constrains the space. I'm saying, if you have to move on, if you have to grow, and if you have to accept certain realities of existence, I think we need to be able to have a good laugh. Sometimes at ourselves. For example, I'm quite happy to have a good, hearty laugh at how I have dealt with the last 10 years.
Mm.
For instance, I initially thought I was a Superman, perhaps, thinking I was a very strong guy, who could deal, say, come on, deal whatever you have to deal with me, and and I can live with it all. The fact of the matter is I was crumbling. And when I thought I should have taken help, including counseling help, I thought I could do it all myself, which is stupid. So I think some humility, some humor, some willingness to sort of let bygones be bygones, I think are all part and parcel of healing and moving on. And the more we're able to do that, I think we will feel more liberated, and I think it will free up others as well and expand the space that we can experience with each other. For example, in our own conversation, I think you are very, very concerned about what we could speak about or what we could not speak about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm a very here and now example, right? And I think I told you, I'm happy to speak about anything. Trust me, I'm not going to be offended unless it's very lowbrow. And we'll see, right? So I stand by this.
Now, you mentioned counseling, not to get too private, but did you try counseling? You did.
No. I heard that other families had been offered access to counseling services, okay, through the network, I gathered. In my pettiness, I think at that time, I said, hey, how come nobody's asked me? How come I'm not aware of this? So I wrote to the airlines and sought that support. And they were gracious enough to extend that. I know it's not very common to be kind to the airline. We're often used to characterizing them as the villain. But they were ready enough to offer. I didn't pick it up. As I said, I thought I was managing quite well. I thought I was doing quite well. I thought I was being fairly functional in the midst of uncertainties. And I thought I was being a reasonably decent support to my family. And I thought I could just get by with the um, with the love and affection that I had from the family. It's much later that I realized that maybe I could have and perhaps should have reached out for some
Mm.
counseling assistance.
And I'll tell you why I asked that, because even today in India, counseling or psychotherapy, they seem to be taboo topics. So that's why
Yes.
I asked. And thanks for sharing what you just said. Uh,
No,
so
no, it's a good
sure,
point
please.
making.
Mm,
I suspect I held a similar uh, prejudice
mm.
and perhaps disdain for those services at that time. And as I said, I I woke up to it to know what it can offer much later.
So as we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you something that um, hit me very powerfully when I read your book. It's about closure. And you said in your book, you've written that you actually picked it from, someone else. You've actually attributed it to the author. That closure is not about letting go of past, but it's letting go of the future you're not to have. Can you talk about that? When did you come across that? And because for me, that was a completely different way of looking at uh, things. Can you expand on that?
It's very interesting that you bring it up.
Mhm.
Um, it had escaped from my memory all these months, all these years since I wrote.
Mm,
And now that you bring it back to the conversation, I realize how significant it is. See, I think um, when you lose somebody, it's not just about what you had with that person. That's certainly one part of it, but it's not all. I think it has also to do with what are the dreams and hopes and plans that you have either constructed or held in conversation. Okay, that extends into the future. Now, I think part of closure, I suspect, has to acknowledge what belongs to memory. Okay, and in a way that is never going to become real and a live thing. Memory is a dead artifact, tangible or intangible. You cannot resurrect it.
mm,
That's what I mean, right? But equally, I think closure does then involve also saying goodbye to what one had envisaged collectively as a future,
mm,
and then to start afresh and say, what is it that I would like to build anew on the back of my own strengths, on the back of my own resilience, on the back of whatever else I've discovered about myself in coping and in dealing with loss. So in that sense, I think um, there are people who, for example, do something in the memory of somebody in the future, right? Which still is about invoking memory, right? It is not about the future. I don't know if this helps, but this is how I internalize the meaning of this particular uh, saying that I came across. Certainly not my
right.
articulation. but it appealed to me hugely at that time.
Mhm.
I think it helped me to make departures. It helped me to, not just sit on my ass and do nothing.
Mhm. So, yeah, I mean, Mrs. Chandrika Narendran, is that how uh, she used to go by?
No, no. She was Chandrika Sharma.
Okay.
She retained her name, and that's what we uh, knew it to be at all times,
Mm.
right? And she was happiest keeping her name, and I was more than happy. So she was Chandrika Sharma.
So, like Mrs. Chandrika Sharma, so many people lost their lives, and the incident affected so many families. But the way you have traveled, the past 10 years, your resilience reminds us that love transcends time, and hope endures even in the darkest of skies. And I do sincerely wish and hope that they locate the aircraft, in your lifetime. There is definitely a possibility of that happening. So let's hope for that. And but for today, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing, uh, your journey, which is not always easy. But thank you so much for taking the time and doing it.
Thank you very much. You've been a patient listener, and your questions have both kindled memory and invited me to explore new avenues, or to rethink stuff that I had already thought I had settled. So it is very useful. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you.